All right, today we are finally going to finish up the Industrial Revolution PowerPoint. I'm going to try to move pretty fast, so keep up to the best of your ability. Again, though, you had the day, on Tuesday to kind of preview a lot of this stuff. Bless you. So it's my hope you got a lot of your notes already, but if there are some things that you didn't get, by all means, get those down. Just remember, for your notes, you don't need every single thing. I just need to see in your notebook that you had, some participation, that you did take notes, that you did pay attention. That being said, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is really important because we're going to be comparing economic systems. And that's going to be something that you're going to see not only in this class, but you're going to see in future classes as well, like U.S. history and obviously government and economics. So pay attention, you should be in pretty good shape. Today, your notebook check is due. It is due before midnight. The link of what you need is up on Canvas currently. You got the list back there. Again, please get that in if at all possible today. Remember, it is a daily grade, but it contributes to your final test grade. And other than that, let's close out Holocaust Remembrance Week before we get started with anything else with our final daily lesson. So read along with me. Friday, lesson 4. Now what? This week, we have taken the time to remember the Holocaust. We learned what it was, who was affected, and how it could have been avoided. You have also been challenged to make a difference in the world by choosing to be an upstander. You, no matter how old, where you come from, or where you are going, can be an agent of change. It can be a small act of trying to make a difference, or you can be a huge difference maker. Either way, you make the choice. Will you stand to the side or stand up? If you want to make the world a better place, you can, one action at a time. So where we left off, definitely not all the way there. And it looks like we got to get a lot to get through, and we do, but most of it we're going to spend like a second on. Where we left off, we talked about just all the dramatic changes that kind of came into play because of industrialization. We talked about a lot of the problems, the poor working conditions, the poor living conditions, and how, laws and reform movements need to be initiated to try to make things a little bit safer, a little bit better for everyone. But as we said, for some people, it really wasn't enough. Once the Industrial Revolution starts, most of these industrialized nations kind of embrace that overall economic philosophy of capitalism. We've talked about it a little bit before. Adam Smith, the Enlightenment writer, it's all about economic freedom, but he was one of the ones that kind of laid the foundation for what capitalism was. And in these industrialized nations, that was just kind of how businesses operated. But one of the problems of capitalism is it is naturally, a system in which not everybody is seen equally, or not everybody receives the same things equally, earns the same amount of money. There's always going to be a disparity of wealth within a capitalist system. Well, some people saw that as a really big issue. They saw capitalism as a system that really benefits the rich and exploits others. They're the ones that kind of come up with socialism and a more extreme form of socialism, because they are very much connected, communism. And that's where we're going to start today. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've got like a slide on each of these. We're just going over the basic characteristics. That way, if you see some of these characteristics in a primary source document, or you see a quote from some of these individuals that are kind of associated with these economic systems, you kind of know what to be thinking of, okay? Just through process of elimination, this could help you answer a whole lot of questions. Also, keep in mind, this is like the textbook style characteristics and definitions. No true capitalist nation or socialist nation necessarily is going to meet every one of these criteria. It's kind of like when we look at governments around the world. We may label them, oh, well, this is a dictatorship, and this is a constitutional monarchy, and this is a republic, okay? We label them based on the characteristics they display, what they're the most like. Know that in a perfect world, if you called somebody a capitalist, if you called a nation a capitalist, they would meet all this criteria. But in reality, things have gotten a lot more mixed together over the years. Again, this is the strictest definition, kind of the original form of all of these. So take it for what it's worth. Bless you. So we've been talking about capitalism, throwing around capitalism, hadn't really gotten into exactly what all it entails. So here's what you need to know. Capitalism goes by a few different names. Some people refer to it as free enterprise because capitalism sometimes has kind of a negative connotation. Other people call it a market economy. It's all the same thing. This is the economic system that historically the United States has embraced the most. This is the economic system that throughout, especially the 20th century, a lot of countries kind of gravitated towards. Now, over time, even the United States has mixed in more elements of socialism. But I think that we would still classify ourselves in this sort of free enterprise mindset. Here's some basic characteristics. And again, you need to recognize when you see these in descriptions, when you see these in actions, we're talking about capitalism. First, if you ever see a quote from Adam Smith, which you will at some point, it's something having to do with this, something to have to do with capitalism. Elements of capitalism have always existed because some of it's just human nature. But he's the guy during the Enlightenment that wrote this book. It came out in 1776, the same year that we declared our independence from Great Britain. But he's the guy that kind of laid the groundwork. He described what a well-functioning economy would look like to best create the wealth of nations. He was criticizing mercantilism. Okay, mercantilism, if you recall, these European countries that had colonies overseas, they were really like puppet masters. They dictated a lot of economic activities within their countries and their colonies. He said that's not the best way. You want to make a wealthy, successful nation and wealthy, successful individuals within your nation, you need to take your hands off the steering wheel a little bit. You need to give people a little bit more economic freedom. He said rather than countries, dictating, what people could buy and sell, private businesses should do that. The buyers and sellers of goods should do that based on laws of supply and demand and competition. Supply and demand is pretty easy, okay? Let's say you go to, you go to Walmart and all of a sudden there's a sale on Cheetos Puffs and it's like half off. Well, you don't really like Cheetos Puffs all that much. You're more of a crunchy Cheeto person or a hot Cheeto person. But man, these Cheetos Puffs are like $1. So you buy a bunch of them. Well, the reason why Walmart put that on sale is they've got a bunch of Cheetos Puffs sitting around. There's not that many people buying them. So they sell them cheaper. They lower the prices to entice you to buy those things. On the flip side, let's say you're just a hot Cheeto fan. You love them. My kid just eats a bunch of hot Cheetos. This is why it's in my head. And there is a nationwide shortage on hot Cheetos. And because there's not a lot of it around, because it's scarce, well, stores start jacking up the prices. And if you really want hot Cheetos, you're going to pay a little bit more. You may pay double. Because in that situation, the supply is low, but demand is high. So they can jack up those prices. It's basic human nature, supply and demand. But that's how most businesses set their prices. They look at how much of a certain item they have. They look at how many people really want it, and they determine prices based on that and what their competitors are doing. Because competition is another central tenet of capitalism. Competition is good for everyone. For individuals, we compete with each other under this system. To have more, to make more, to do more, to be better. Okay? Competition brings out the best in all of us, theoretically. In the business world, competition is good for us. If today were Tuesday, I might want to go get a Taco Tuesday, And if I wanted to get a taco in this area, there's a bunch of places I could go. I could go to Taco Bueno in Lake Worth. That's kind of far away. Taco Cabana, they closed that down, so I didn't really have to go far away. I could could go to Taco Casa, which would probably be my choice. I could go to Three Parrots, which is okay, but I probably wouldn't go there. I could go to Taco Bell, which I don't really do Taco Bell, but I could. They all have tacos, and the prices are probably pretty similar. Well, then it's based on my preference. Okay, that's competition. You can't have Taco Bell charging $10 a taco and Taco Casa charging $1, because everybody's gonna start going to Taco Casa. All right. Competition helps keep prices low. It also helps keep quality high. On the other hand, if Taco Bell was the only taco place within a 100-mile radius, and even if their tacos sucked and they were terrible, and I don't really like Taco Bell, so that's kind of how I feel. If I really wanted a taco, I'd have to go there, even though I don't like it. So competition, I'm telling you, it's good for everybody. It's good for the economy. It's good for all of us as individuals. That is a central tenet of capitalism. Because under capitalism, not only are businesses competing, but everybody's competing. There's only so much money, and we all need to be working hard to get after it. And that theoretically is going to bring out the best in everything. As we've already said, open competition provides incentives for hard work. It allows for the creation of wealth. And ideally, the government would stay out of all this. That's what laissez-faire means. Laissez-faire, French, literally translates to something like hands off. Governments, keep your hands off the economy. If you just let businesses drive things, if you let the buyers and sellers of goods, the consumers drive things, things will take their natural course. And through competition and all these other characteristics, things will ultimately be the best for everyone. Bless you. Now, a really positive thing under a pure capitalist system is there are very low taxes. Okay, and that's the big selling point. Everybody hates paying taxes. One of the big drawbacks, though, is under a pure capitalist system, the government ain't helping you. Not much at all. Welfare, unemployment, things of that nature, nah, you're on your own. So there's some drawbacks there. And obviously, as time's progressed, even capitalist countries have had to integrate more and more services. But the idea behind this is under a pure capitalist system, you can't really rely on the government much at all. Okay, other than to, do the basic things, build roads and hospitals and stuff like that. As far as real, social financial services, they're not going to help you a whole lot. But that means that people don't have to pay as much taxes to support those programs. The big knock on this, though, is under this system, there's always going to be an unequal distribution of wealth. Again, I had said, we've got the 1%ers, that control the bulk of the world's wealth. Okay, that's kind of messed up. It is what it is, but it's kind of messed up. And there's always going to be that huge gap between rich and poor under a capitalist system, because it's not built for people to be equal. It's not built for everybody to have the same thing. It's based on what you're able to individually achieve, based on how you compete, based on, what you're able to do. And theoretically, if you work hard and you get up earlier and you do more and you're smarter than the other guy, you can have more. Now, maybe that's a reality, maybe it's not. There's a lot of people that can debate that. But those are the central tenets. It's that last part, though, the unequal distribution of wealth that really got under people's skin. Okay, during this time period especially, some people saw those wealthy industrialists having so much and the factory workers, the laborers, having so little. They said, this is just sheer exploitation. There's got to be a different way of organizing things. That's where you start to see socialism and communism, which are tied together, start to develop. So that's capitalism. There's more to it, but that's the gist of it. Know the characteristics. Now, on this slide, I have both socialism and communism because it's really important to put them side by side, because communism is really just an extreme form of socialism. Socialism we see all the time in the world today, and every government's got an element of socialism to it. As times progressed, we tend to see more characteristics like this creep into most governments. Some governments are outright socialist to this day. This is sometimes called a mixed economy. Because on one hand, people do have economic freedom, but the government also plays a much bigger role than they would in capitalism. This is inspired by all sorts of different writers and philosophers of this time period, of the Industrial Revolution. They were really looking to create a sort of utopian, a perfect society. This is very idealistic. The chief goal is more economic equality. That's the big thing. Okay? Not everybody's going to be completely equal. You know, there's still going to be people that are rich. There's still going to be people that are poor. But there's much less of a gap between them. Things are a little bit more equitable across the board. Okay, which doesn't sound bad. They believe that, and this is out of the context of the time period, but they believe that this is possible, that working conditions, that living conditions, that equality could be achieved through political action. You know, if people unionize and people protest and if people, you know, go out to the polls, you know, you can make this happen gradually over time. Communism has a different vision of how it can all happen. Under socialism, the government's going to control some aspects of the economy. I mean, they're just going to straight up regulate it. And in fact, major resources, major industries, a lot of times are actually owned by the government on behalf of the people. So in a socialist country, you know, a lot of the energy, you know, the electric companies, the oil companies, your water companies, you know, transportation, a lot of that is owned and operated by the government. That way, private businesses aren't profiting off the things that everybody needs. And because the government takes them over, theoretically, they can make prices a little bit more equitable across the board. They also, in socialist countries, are going to provide a lot more social services for you, like free health care, maybe free education, maybe greater help with getting a house or a car. One of the things that's being popularized now is the concept of universal basic income, especially now, you know, with the pandemic and, you know, the struggling economy that some people are really enduring right now. The idea that, hey, maybe the government gives you a little bit of money every month, not just these stimulus checks. Okay, so the idea is the government's going to help you more. The government's going to do more for you. But that stuff ain't free. Your taxes are higher. And that's a knock, bless you. And again, I'm not criticizing any one system. You got to look at all sides of it. But the big knock on, you know, purely socialist countries is, you know, all those programs cost money, and it doesn't just come from nowhere. Ultimately, taxes are usually much higher than you would see in a purely capitalist country. So under capitalism, ideally, very few services, but low taxes. In socialism, it's the opposite. A whole bunch of services, a lot's provided to you, but, you know, everybody's kind of pitching in through higher taxes. Communism takes socialism to the extreme. These are the extremists that said, nope, 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 that ain't even enough. When you see the names Karl Marx, especially Marx, but Friedrich Engels, those are kind of the architects of communist ideology. And I'm going to tell you these characteristics, but just hear this. And we're going to watch a video over this that's going to explain more. There's never really been a country in history that's met all these characteristics. Even countries that have called themselves communist, they've never actually lived up to this, not all of it. Because communism as an ideal, it's not realistic. And when it's been attempted, it's never really worked in the long term. Socialism has been successful places, but communism, not so much. So when you see Marx or Engels, those are the guys that wrote the Communist Manifesto. There's a big criticism of everything going on with industrial capitalism. They too believe that workers are being exploited by the business owners. Now, socialists said, you know what, we can improve things gradually through voting and political action. Communists say the only way to make things better is violent revolution. Essentially, the workers need to kill the wealthy and take over. I mean, we're talking violent revolution. They believe there needed to be a complete overhaul in society. And you will notice the places that thoroughly try to commit to communism, like Russia when they turned into the Soviet Union, China, when they transitioned through all their various forms of government to a communist system. Cuba, North Korea, there was a violent revolution preceding the implementation of a lot of these policies. Because that's the deal. You gotta kill off the wealthy. You gotta kill off the people that are abusing others in order to try to establish something that's equal. And that is the goal. The goal is not to make things more even. The goal is to make a truly classless society. Nobody's rich, nobody's poor, everybody's the exact same. Now that on paper doesn't sound bad, but it's not realistic. And what generally ends up happening is people are more equal, but they're equally struggling. They're equally poor. Whereas the government, they get all the wealth and the power. Again, it's just a weird system. You've got to give up so much control to the government to even attempt this, that sort of absolute power inevitably corrupts absolutely. Under communism, the government controls pretty much all aspects of the economy, but they also provide for the people's needs. You're going to get your food, you're going to get your job, you're going to get your house, you're going to get all that stuff from the government. Now, you may have to stand in that bread line for about 6 hours before you get a loaf of bread, but they're going to give you your stuff. Might just have a little mold on it. Under a purely communist system, there is no private property. There is no private business because the government pretty much owns everything. Your wages, how much you make, your job, where you work, what you do, that is all determined by the government to best meet the needs of the community. Guys, under capitalism, it's all about you, the individual. It's dog eat dog. It's survival of the fittest. Under communism, they don't care about you. They care about the whole. What's best for the whole? Well, the government under that system is going to determine that. And that's kind of a scary thing. Again, cooperation replaces competition. Decisions are made for the good of the community, not the individual. Here's the biggest problem. Two biggest problems. First, to give up this much power to even try to do this, you almost always end up with an authoritarian government. You look at like North Korea today. They're one of the few, they're probably the most communist country still around. You look historically, at China under Mao Zedong, at the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. I mean, those are straight up dictatorships. Very violent, very oppressive dictatorships. So history has shown us that authoritarianism usually accompanies us. But the biggest flaw of the communist mindset is there's no real incentive to work hard. Okay, there's fear, but there's no incentive. So think about it like this. You work at an automobile factory. And Russia made a couple cars that were terrible while they were the Soviet Union. But you work in a Soviet automobile factory and somebody else, one of your friends works next to you and he got the exact same jobs. Like what I said the other day, maybe all you're doing is putting the lug nuts in the wheels, getting the tires on there. You go through and man, you are tearing it up. You are putting on lug nuts left and right. You're sweating. You are just working hard. You're the best employee in the place. Your buddy working next to you, he sucks. He's not very good. He doesn't care that much. He does just enough not to get in trouble, but he really doesn't work that hard. End of the month, you get your 100 rubles or whatever. End of the month, he gets his 100 rubles. And on it goes because we got to treat y'all equally. Well, after a while, you're not working so hard anymore. It's like if I just gave everybody A's, if you just turn stuff in. Well, after a while, those of you that are really busting your butt to turn in quality work, you're going to start doing the bare minimum too because you realize it doesn't matter how hard you work, you're never going to get ahead. You're only going to be as successful as the laziest person in class. That's the inherent flaw of communism, and that's why over time it's never really worked. They've always had struggles. Now, the Soviet Union, they had a rise for sure. It did work in the short term, but the Soviet Union's not around anymore. That's for a reason. They went back to being Russia, which still has some similarities with the Soviet Union, but they're not communist anymore. So that's the gist of it. Again, little crash course, but remember the basic characteristics. If you can do that, you'll probably be okay if you come up with any of this stuff on a test or a quiz or an essay, being able to describe some of these systems and some of their characteristics. That's the sort of stuff that might get you some points on this essay that's coming up. Now, we got one video today, and it's not bad. It's real short. It's like 4 minutes. And it's going to kind of compare socialism and communism specifically. And their argument is, hey, there's never really been a true blue communist country. Only hardcore socialist countries that call themselves communists. Now, I'm going to pause a couple times and ask you to write a few things down. It's not going to be much. There's some buzzwords. I want you to know, hey, if you hear these words, they're talking about communism, or at least people trying to be communists.
This might come as a surprise, but in the history of the modern world, there has never been a communist country. While a number of countries have described themselves as communist, for example, China and North Korea, by definition, there has never been a true communist country. So, what exactly is communism, and how does it relate to socialism? Well, it may be easier to explain what the two have in common. Both ideologies originate from a desire to limit worker exploitation and lower or eliminate the influence of economic classes in society. There are dozens of variations on both communism and socialism based on the different ways these ideologies are implemented in different countries. There's Stalinism, Leninism, Trotskyism, Maoism, and others which are essentially all versions of Marxism, coupled with various...
Okay, you don't got to write all those down. Let me just kind of explain. Karl Marx, kind of like Adam Smith, he wrote the Communist Manifesto with a guy named Frederick Engels, but usually you're going to hear Marx. And Marxism is like his version of what communism should be. But all the prominent communist leaders that really try to employ this kind of put their own twist on it. You got Joseph Stalin, even before him, Vladimir Lenin, both in the Soviet Union. You also got Leon Trotsky, who was in the Soviet Union. After Vladimir Lenin died, who's like the first leader of the Soviet Union, these two guys were in competition with each other. Trotsky ended up losing, he gets murdered. Stalin takes over, but part of their beef was they had different ways of enacting communism. Maoism is named after Mao Zedong. He was the leader of the People's Republic of China, modern China, okay? The first communist leader of China. So I'm not saying you don't remember all of this, but if you hear those names, you need to learn to associate them with that sort of communism. There's one other thing, but that's coming up here in a second. It's two really weird words.
Karl Marx was an economist and philosopher who co-wrote the Communist Manifesto, among other foundational books on communism. In short, his theory centered around the idea that as Europe transitioned from centralized monarchies to quasi-democratic capitalist economies, workers were being exploited by those who owned the means of production. So if you work in a factory or on a farm, as many at the time did, whoever owns the factory or farm is getting more out of the worker than they're putting in. This creates an inherent inequality, giving the owners, who Marx called the bourgeoisie, power.
Okay, this is a weird word, but I want you to write it down. Under communism, in the Communist Manifesto, I remember being in college, I had to read some of the Communist Manifesto, and all he talks about is the bourgeoisie and a group called the proletariat, which I'll show you how to spell that too. And my instructor never bothered to tell us what bourgeoisie and proletariat meant, so the whole thing made no sense. Now I kind of see what they were talking about. But the bourgeoisie is what he called the business owners. That's all it is, bourgeoisie. I'm going to write this on the board because bourgeoisie is kind of hard to spell. So you got about as long as it takes me to copy it yourself. And I believe this is another French term. People love their French terms. So this is the business owners. These are the rich. These are the people that are exploiting everybody else. He said we got to get rid of these guys through violent revolution.
Power over the workers, called the proletariat. In Marxism, to fix this inequality, society must be called the proletariat.
There we go. So the proletariat are your workers. That's the working class. Those are the people that are being exploited. And ultimately, those are the people that need to overthrow everything, launch a violent revolution, take over the businesses and the means of production, By doing that, communism can be made a reality. So you hear any sort of quote where they're talking about the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, you better associate that with communism. And I'm telling you, I've said this before in this class, but a lot of it is vocab. And it's not so much, I have to know every single definition, but you do need to be familiar with a lot of this academic vocabulary, because on a lot of tests, the AP test, a lot of it is you looking at questions, you looking at source documents, seeing these weird words, and if you know what they mean, everything else starts to unravel and kind of make sense. This is a weird word that you probably will see again.
In Marxism, to fix this inequality, society must shift towards a model where the proletariat holds its power instead, by collectively controlling the means of production. That's where socialism and communism come into play. According to Marx, socialism is a precursor to communism and the next logical step after capitalism. In socialism, a democratic state controls the means of production, rather than having private companies hold ownership. Instead of competing with each other as in a capitalist society, socialism has workers contribute as much as they can to the greater good, and then they all share equally in that good. Variations of this idea are already popular within capitalist societies in the form of universal health care or social services like fire departments and schools funded by taxes. While the use of these services is unequal, everyone is equally responsible for contributing to them based on their ability or level of income. So that's socialism. But once the state controls all the means of production, the next step is total collective ownership, not just of production, but all aspects of society and economy, including private property. The intention of abolishing private property is a classless, moneyless, and stateless society, where everyone works towards the same collective goal of being healthy, happy, and free. Everybody does what they can to contribute and takes only what they need in return. As I said before, there are no true communist countries, and there never have been. Every so-called communist country is actually a socialist country, with the state controlling employment and economy to some degree. Even the widely referred to communist Russia was actually called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. In short, socialism.
Okay, we're going to stop there. But yeah, he's got a good point. No country's ever actually lived up to the pure ideals, the pure definition of communism. They kind of tried, but communism essentially is just a very extreme form of socialism. But you do still got to be able to distinguish between the two. All right, so for the rest of this PowerPoint, and there's a lot, most of it is me just kind of showing you some pictures. All right, I'm going to go over some inventions, some inventors, and a bunch of other stuff, some writers, some artists, some musicians, just to kind of show you the transformation that took place between 1750 and 1900. I would recommend, especially like for, technology and communication and science, jot down a few people's names and what they did. Okay, don't do everybody because I'm going to move quick because I have to because there's a lot. But just jot down a few names, a few things that they developed. That way later on, if you're talking about the historical significance of the Industrial Revolution, you've got some specific people, some specific things you can bring up, to kind of emphasize just how transformative all this was. I'm going to move fast, so be prepared. Here we go. First, we're going to talk about advances in technology and communication. And they're all kind of structured, or most of them are structured like this. I'll have a name, there'll be some pictures, brief description. And I did put some stuff in red that I think, honestly, you just got that down. You'd probably have something worthwhile. So here we go. Let me take a drink of water because I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to go through this, not quite like an auctioneer, but pretty darn fast. And this stuff, the PowerPoint that you previewed on Tuesday, I took all this out just because there was too much. So here we go. Michael Faraday, English scientist, 1820s to the 1830s, made key discoveries about electricity, developed the first electric generator, transformed mechanical power into electrical power. Pretty big deal. Thomas Edison, American inventor, 1879, developed the light bulb that initially glowed for 2 days, developed a system for transmitting electricity from a central powerhouse using direct current, kind of the designer of some of the first electric grids. Problem was direct current, can only go for a short distance. He needed some help. There was this guy that worked for him, Nikola Tesla, who he essentially bet couldn't fix the power grid, and he did. And then Thomas Edison reportedly ripped him off, and they became bitter enemies for the rest of their life. But Nikola Tesla, Tesla Motor Company is named after him, although he didn't have any involvement. He died way before. It's just inspired by him. He was a Serbian-American inventor. He was also a physicist. We already said inventor, electrical engineer, best known for the alternating current system of electricity, 1888. We know AC, DC as far as electrical current. He's the AC guy. Definitely gave a little bit more versatility as far as the distance that electricity could travel. Alexander Graham Bell, American inventor, 1870s, transmitted the human voice over long distance by electrical circuit through wire. 1876, patented the telephone. Guglielmo Marconi, Italian inventor, 1895, developed a way to send messages through space without a wire. 1901, patented the wireless telegraph using radio waves. Henry Ford, American inventor and manufacturer, 1908, produced the first commercial automobile. The Model T used assembly lines to mass produce automobiles, making automobiles much more affordable and popular. Wilbur and Orville Wright, American inventors, aviators, 1903, first to have a sustained control flight in an airplane. Years later, used internal combustion engines to propel airplanes. But it wasn't just technology. There were a lot of advances in science and medicine as well. Charles Darwin, British naturalist, 1859, developed the theory of evolution, which we'll actually talk about a little bit more later on. Published ideas on the origin of species by means of natural selection. Gregor Mendel. You probably had to do those Punnett squares at some point. That's this guy. Austrian monk, 1850 to 1860, founded the study of genetics. Edward Jenner, English physician, mid-1700s, investigated smallpox. 1796, developed the smallpox vaccine, which, throughout history was a huge killer. You don't really hear about it anymore. Louis Pasteur, French chemist, 1860s, discovered scientific principles at work to study germs and diseases, vaccines, antibodies. 1860s, discovered the pasteurization process, heating liquids to kill bacteria. When you drink your milk at home, it is pasteurized, unless you're like milking the cow yourself. Joseph Lister, English surgeon, mid-1860s, developed antisepsis, the use of chemicals to kill disease-causing germs. Listerine mouthwash is named after him. Alexander Fleming, Scottish biologist, 1928, a little bit later, developed penicillin to fight bacterial infections, the foundation of modern antibiotics. Dmitry Mendeleev, Russian chemist, 1869, created classification of scientific elements called the periodic table. Wilhelm Röntgen, German physicist, 1895, discovered the X-ray, that rays could go through many substances, including skin and tissues. Pierre and Marie Curie, French chemists, 1898, invented the term radioactivity, that elements break down and release energy. Shared the 1903 Nobel Prize, and Marie won again in 1911. Max Planck, German physicist, 1900, developed the quantum theory. Energy can only be released in definite packages and quanta. And of course, Albert Einstein, German scientist, 1905, developed special theory of relativity, that no particles move faster than the speed of light. 1905 also developed the theory of E equals mc squared. Mass can be transformed into energy, energy into mass. He didn't make it directly, but it's based on his theories that you get the atomic bomb that we ended up dropping in World War II. Now, this next part I'm going through real fast because this is just art, music, literature, and not to trivialize that, but it's just to kind of show you the different sort of artistic and musical movements that were around and some of the people involved. You've got popularity in Romanticism, writers like the Grimm brothers, Romantic era musicians, people like Chopin and Schubert, Tchaikovsky. I don't know why it's doing this on this one. Beethoven, he comes from this time period as well. Photography develops during this time period. Early photographs in 1839, film 1884, leads more to the realism movement. Different writers and authors, or same thing, painters, and, you name it, realism, trying to depict life how it really is. People like, Tolstoy and realism, regionalism, Mark Twain, writers like Charles Dickens, painters like Monet, Renoir. I mean, some of the most famous works of art come out of this time period, and they're very much reflections of the time period itself. People like Van Gogh, Rodin. It's just crazy how much change came out of this time period. One of the biggest things, though, and this is kind of one of the last things that we really need to get into, life expectancy and human population in general. With all this advancement in technology and medicine and science in general, people start living longer. We start knowing more about healthcare and just the natural world around us. With all these inventions, life gets a little bit easier. And since the start of the Industrial Revolution, say the mid 1700s, just look at what's happened. I mean, for most of history, life expectancy isn't all that high. You get to the mid 1700s, you're looking at, on average, in the West anyway, about 40 years old, a little less. But it's been on the rise ever since. People have made more money ever since. People have lived longer ever since. And our population has boomed ever since. I mean, you look at most of human history, population doesn't raise all that much. It goes up a little bit. But we're hovering, at 500 million people up until the 1500s. And then with the Columbian Exchange, things start to rise up. Then by the time industrialization starts, by the time you get to 1800, we're at 1 billion, and it just keeps going and going and going and going. And today we've got close to 7.9 billion people, 331 in the US. I mean, that is maybe the biggest effect of industrialization. There's just more of us. And, this trend's going to continue. Life expectancy is still rising up. Birth rate is still rising up. It's this never-ending cycle. And I mean, on this chart, they're predicting by 2050, we're going to have 9 billion people. It's pretty astonishing. But that's history. It all had to start somewhere. So I'm telling you, the Industrial Revolution is connected to everything. Now, I ain't going to go over all this. If you would like to take a picture of it or later on look at it, that's fine. But all this is kind of a chart I created summarizing some of the main causes, some of the main effects of the Industrial Revolution. We talked about all these within the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to spend time going over them again. That being said, before we do this essay, you may want to give this a gander. This is going to be an excellent resource for you because this does break down a lot of the things that you need to know. And with that, we're finally done. Yay! In 6 minutes or so. Next week, we're still going to be talking about Industrial Revolution related stuff. We're going to talk about some of the governments that had to play an active role and try to force industrialization, some of the people that suffered at the hands of these industrialized countries. Got some book stuff, got a cool video hopefully you can watch. Towards the end of the week, we will go over or review exactly how to do one of these essays, LEQ. Then we will either have the essay on Friday or Monday. I'm still debating. I'm kind of looking and seeing what all we're going to do next week and how long I think things will take. But we will go over how to do it beforehand. That essay will be your first test grade of the 6 weeks. But today, no books due. So get that in. It needs to be in before midnight. Otherwise, it's going to be late. There's really not a whole heck of a lot in it. So, even if you haven't done a lot of it, you can get caught up in short order. and get this thing submitted on time. Don't let the notebook be something that at the end of the 6 weeks bites you in the butt, as it has for some of you. Take advantage of it because it's designed to help you. Other than that, we are done.